Her children were taken while she slept, and by the time Eliza Carter opened her eyes, the house already felt wrong in a way she could not yet explain. The silence carried weight, not the soft quiet that usually settled before sunrise in a home with tired children still asleep beneath quilts, but the kind of silence that arrived after something living had been removed from the world. The air itself seemed colder, empty. The bed beside the stove was cold where small bodies should have been tangled together through the night, and the front door stood half open to a dawn that smelled of dust, horse sweat, and danger that had arrived long before the first light touched the plains. For a moment she stayed frozen at the table where she had fallen asleep sometime after midnight, her hands still resting near the open ledger spread beneath the dying lantern. Numbers blurred across the page. Payments, land notes, names of men who owed money they would never manage to repay. Her husband used to say numbers told the truth even when people refused to. After he died, those same numbers became the only thing standing between her children and the men who wanted what little she still owned. The latch tapped softly against the doorframe as the wind pushed through the house. Once, twice, again. Eliza stood slowly, every part of her suddenly alert. Her eyes moved toward the small room near the back wall where Sarah and Jonah slept every night. She waited to hear something, a cough, a sleepy voice. Jonah turning in bed, Sarah asking if breakfast was ready even before sunrise. Nothing came. Her chest tightened hard enough to hurt. She crossed the room quickly, bare feet striking cold wooden planks, and pushed open the bedroom door so fast it hit the wall with a dull crack. The blankets were twisted across both mattresses as if the children had been pulled from sleep in a hurry. One pillow lay on the floor. Sarah's small knitted doll rested near the bed frame where it had been dropped. The room was empty. No children, no voices, no breath except her own. The fear hit all at once, sharp enough to steal the air from her lungs. Eliza turned and rushed outside without stopping for boots or a coat. Cold dirt bit into the bottoms of her feet as she stepped into the yard. The morning sky had only just begun to lighten, turning the horizon pale gray behind the distant hills. Wagon tracks cut deep through the dirt road in front of the house, fresh enough that loose dust still shifted at the edges. 2 sets of horse prints ran alongside them, not local horses, too large, driven hard. The trough near the fence had been knocked sideways. One gatepost leaned badly, pushed half loose from the ground. Someone had come fast and left faster. Eliza stared at the tracks as panic and fury twisted together inside her chest. Then she heard boots behind her. Eliza. The voice came low and steady. She turned sharply. Thomas Hale stood near the edge of the property with his hat in his hands, his horse breathing heavily behind him. Dust coated his coat and trousers as though he had already been riding since long before dawn. He looked toward the road first, then back at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. He already knew. "My children," she said. The words barely sounded like her own voice. Thomas nodded once. "I saw the wagon before sunrise." Her throat tightened painfully. "How many men?" "2 that I saw," he answered. "One driving, one riding behind with a rifle." "Which direction?" "North Road, toward the ridge." Eliza stepped past him immediately, moving toward the road as though she could follow the tracks on foot if necessary. "Then we go now." "You need boots first," Thomas said calmly. "And a coat." She shook her head without slowing. "I do not care." "You will when the cold hits after dark." She stopped then, turning toward him with eyes sharpened by fear and exhaustion. "They took my children." Thomas held her gaze evenly. "I know." The answer came quiet, but solid enough to stop her anger from spilling over. For a second, neither of them spoke. Wind moved across the dry fields surrounding the property, carrying the smell of dust and dying grass. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled faintly across the plains. Thomas glanced toward her house. 10 minutes, he said. "I will saddle another horse." The town still slept while Eliza rushed back inside. Storefronts remained shuttered. The church bell had not yet rung. A stray dog wandered near the road before disappearing between buildings. Nobody stepped outside. Nobody asked questions. Inside the house, everything looked painfully ordinary despite the horror tearing through it. Jonah's wooden cup still sat near the sink. Sarah's sweater hung beside the stove. A loaf of bread remained half cut on the counter from the night before. Eliza pulled on her boots with shaking hands and grabbed her coat from the wall hook beside the door. She paused only once when she reached the children's room again. The blankets still held their shape. The emptiness inside that room nearly broke her where she stood. But grief could wait. Fear could wait. Her children could not. When she stepped outside again, Thomas was waiting beside two horses. Steam rose from their mouths into the cold morning air. He handed her the reins without a word. Eliza mounted quickly. The movement surprised him slightly. "You ride," he said. "I grew up around cattle before I married," she answered. Something shifted in his expression then. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, perhaps. Thomas climbed into his own saddle and turned toward the road leading north. "The tracks split near the dry creek," he said. "We will follow the softer ground first." Eliza tightened her grip on the reins. "Who sent them?" Thomas stayed silent for too long. That silence told her enough. "Grayson," she said flatly. Thomas finally nodded. Nathan Grayson owned land, debt, and fear in nearly every corner of the county. Men lost ranches to him after droughts. Widows signed papers they did not understand. Payments disappeared from records. Families who argued too loudly often vanished quietly afterward. Eliza knew too much about his books. She had kept records for half the town since her husband's death. "He wants the ledger," she said. "And he thinks your children will make you hand it over," Thomas answered. The first line of sunlight finally broke across the horizon, stretching thin gold across the dry plains. Dust rose beneath the horses as they started north. Eliza did not look back at the house, not once. Ahead of them stretched miles of open land, empty roads and the fading tracks of the wagon carrying her children farther away with every passing minute. Thomas rode slightly ahead, eyes fixed on the dirt. "They are pushing the horses hard," he muttered. "Good," Eliza answered quietly. He glanced back toward her. Tired horses slow down. "Two children," Thomas said after a time. "How old?" 8 and 6, she said. "Sarah and Jonah." He nodded, as if marking it in a place that mattered. "They will not be hurt if they are meant for leverage," he said. "Men like Grayson keep what they can use." "And if they are not?" she asked. His jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping once. "Then we ride faster." The fork in the road came as he had said, the dry creek cutting a pale line through the land. He reined in, dismounted without a word, and crouched near the ground, his hand hovering over the tracks as if he could feel what had passed there. Eliza watched, her breath steady, her heart not. "They took the north," he said, standing. "Wagon is heavy, horses were pushed." She slid from her saddle, the leather creaking under her hands. "Show me." He hesitated, just a fraction, then stepped aside. She crouched where he had been, her fingers brushing the dirt, the grooves cut deep where wheels had bitten in. "One horse is favoring the left," she said. "See the shorter stride. They will slow." He looked at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "You are right." She stood. "Then we do not waste time." He mounted, and they rode on. By the time the sun had climbed enough to burn the chill from the air, they had covered miles of open land, the horizon a hard line that did not change no matter how far they went. Sweat dampened the back of Eliza's neck under her hair, the collar of her coat sticking to her skin. The horse beneath her moved with a steady, powerful gait, its breath warm against her boots. They passed no one, no wagons, no riders, only the tracks ahead, and the knowledge that each hour widened the distance between her and the small bodies that should have been within reach. "Why you?" Thomas said, not looking at her. "Why your house?" She kept her eyes forward. "Because I keep records," she said. "For the school, for the church, for the town when they ask and no one else can read what is written plain." "And Grayson does not like what is written plain," he said. "No," she said. "He prefers it rewritten." They rode until the sun stood high and the heat pressed down, heavy and unyielding. The land flattened, the sparse brush giving way to stretches of hard-packed earth that held the day's warmth like a grudge. The tracks grew fainter where the ground changed, then clearer again, where the wagon had crossed a patch of softer soil. "Water ahead," Thomas said, nodding toward a line of darker green in the distance, a creek that still runs. She nodded, her throat dry, her lips cracked. They will stop there. Or they will push through, he said. Depends who is driving. They reached the creek by midday, the sound of it a thin thread under the hum of insects. The water moved slow over stones, clear and cold. The air there held a different scent, damp earth, green things that had not yet given up. Thomas dismounted first, leading his horse down the bank. Eliza followed, her boots sinking slightly into the softer ground. She knelt at the edge, cupped the water in her hands and drank, the cold sharp against her teeth. He watched the opposite bank, eyes scanning, body still in a way that spoke of held readiness. They stopped, he said. Tracks are deeper here. Horses drank. Children, she asked. He moved along the bank, then crouched, touching the mud where small prints marked a place near the water. They were out of the wagon, he said. For a minute. Eliza moved to his side, her hand hovering over the smaller footprints, her breath catching in her throat before she forced it steady. They are alive, she said, not as a hope, but as a statement she would not let break. He glanced at her, then back at the ground. They are alive, he agreed. She stood, the damp air clinging to her skin. Then, we do not stop. He nodded. We do not stop. They mounted again, the horses restless under them, sensing the urgency that had sharpened. The road beyond the creek rose slightly, the land opening into a stretch of plains that offered no cover, no place to hide, only distance. Grayson's place is north of here, Thomas said. Past the ridge, he has got men. A foreman who does not mind doing what needs doing. Then we go through them, she said. He looked at her then, something almost like a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled back into the hard lines he wore. We go through what we have to, he said. They rode into the afternoon, the heat settling into their bones, the dust coating their tongues. Time stretched, then compressed, marked only by the rhythm of hooves and the slow shift of light. By the 4th hour, the tracks veered off the main road, cutting toward a line of low hills that broke the horizon. Thomas slowed, his gaze narrowing. They are changing direction, he said, taking the ridge. Why? She asked. To lose anyone following, he said. Harder ground. Wind up there will take what is left of the tracks. She tightened her grip on the reins. Then, we do not lose them. He met her eyes, something unspoken passing between them, an understanding that neither of them had asked for this, that both of them were past the point of turning back. We will not, he said. They turned toward the hills, the ground rising under the horses' hooves, the air thinning, cooling slightly as they climbed. The wind picked up, carrying the dry scent of grass and stone, tugging at their coats. At the base of the ridge, Thomas reined in again, dismounting to study the ground where the wagon had left the road. The tracks were fainter here, the soil harder, the wind already beginning to blur their edges. They went up, he said, but slow. That lame horse is costing them. Eliza slid from her saddle, her legs stiff, her hands steady. Then we gain. He straightened, looking up the slope, then back at her. It will be rough, he said. You will need to stay close. I do not follow, she said. I ride beside. A corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, more a recognition. Then, stay beside. They began the climb, the horses picking their way over loose stones, the wind stronger here, biting through cloth and skin. The world narrowed to the path ahead, to the sound of breath and hoof and the steady, relentless pull upward. Halfway up, Thomas slowed, his hand lifting slightly as a signal. Eliza followed suit, bringing her horse to a halt. The wind carried something then faint. But there, the creak of wood, the jingle of harness. They are close, he said, his voice low. Eliza's heart struck hard against her ribs, the sound loud in her ears. How many? She asked. 2 men, maybe 3, he said. Wagon is heavy. They will not have more. And my children, she said. And your children, he agreed. He swung down from his horse, moving with a quiet that belied his size, leading the animal the last stretch to where the ridge leveled out. Eliza followed, the wind cold against her face, the smell of dust sharp in her nose. They crested the ridge together. Below, in a shallow dip between hills, the wagon stood, one horse hitched, the other tied off to a scrubby tree, its head low. Two men moved around it, one checking a wheel, the other pouring water from a canteen. The sound of a child's voice carried faintly, cut off quickly. Eliza's hand tightened on the reins until her knuckles whitened. "There," she said, though she did not need to. Thomas' gaze tracked the scene, assessing, calculating. "We do not rush," he said. "We watch. We find the moment." She looked at him, her eyes steady, her voice stripped of everything but intent. "We do not leave without them." He met her gaze, something shifting in his own, something that had not been there when he had stood at the edge of her yard at dawn. "We do not leave without them," he said. And below, one of the men turned, scanning the ridge as if he had felt the weight of their eyes, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Thomas moved first, dropping low behind a boulder, his hand signaling her down. She sank with him, the rough stone cold against her palm, her breath shallow but even. The man below shaded his eyes, squinting up the slope. Nothing moved, no sound, but the wind and the distant snort of a horse. He spat into the dust, turned back to the wagon, muttering something that did not carry. Thomas waited until the man had bent to the wheel again. "Now," he said, "we circle left. Use the scrub for cover." Eliza nodded. Lead. They slipped down the far side of the ridge, horses left tied above, boots silent on the loose gravel. The air grew thicker in the dip, heavy with the scent of horse sweat and unwashed wool. The second man stood guard now, rifle loose in his hands, eyes on the open plain rather than the hills. Thomas touched her arm, pointed to a cluster of low bushes 30 paces out. She saw it. The wagon sat between them and the men, canvas flapping slightly in the breeze. Voices came then, small and muffled from inside. "Mama." Eliza froze, her blood turning to ice despite the heat. "Sarah." She started forward, but Thomas gripped her wrist, firm, unyielding. "Wait," he said. "One wrong move and they shoot first." She pulled against his hold, just enough to test it. He did not let go. Not yet. The guard shifted, spitting tobacco into the dirt. His boot scraped. He turned his head slightly, then froze. Listened. Then he called out, low. "Ben." "We got company up top." The first man straightened, hand to his belt. "Where?" "Ridge." "Thought I saw a movement." Eliza did not breathe. Thomas did not move. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Ben snorted, wind and shadows. Grayson said, "No one's fool enough to follow this far. Get the kids quiet, and let's roll." The guard grunted, slung his rifle, and yanked back the canvas flap. "Shut it, boy, or I'll shut it for you." A small cry cut off. Jonah. Eliza's nails dug into her palms. Thomas released her wrist. "Go wide. I'll take the guard. You to the wagon." She met his eyes. No words, just the nod. They split, moving like smoke through the scrub. The ground sloped down, dry grass crackling faintly underfoot. Heat rose from the earth in waves, the air tasting of salt and iron. Thomas reached the bushes first, low and still. The guard paced 10 paces away, back turned. Thomas coiled, then sprang silent, massive, his arm locking around the man's throat before he could yell. The rifle dropped, a choked gasp, then nothing. Eliza was already moving, skirt caught in thorns she ignored, straight to the wagon. The canvas parted under her hands. Sarah and Jonah huddled inside, wide-eyed, dirt-streaked faces turning up. "Mama," Sarah whispered. Eliza pulled them close, one arm around each, the scent of their hair, fear and creek water filling her lungs. "Shh, we go now." Ben turned at the sound, eyes widening. "What the?" Thomas stepped from the bushes, the guard's rifle in his hands, leveled steady. Step away, slow. Ben froze, hand twitching toward his hip. "You Hale's ranch. Did not think you'd come this far for her brats." Thomas did not blink. Step away. Ben sneered, but his feet moved, backing from the wagon. "She ain't worth it. Grayson'll pay you to forget." Eliza lifted Jonah first, small weight solid against her hip, then Sarah. Thomas covered them as they moved to the horses above, Ben's eyes burning into their backs. They mounted fast, children clutched tight, and rode hard from the dip, the ridge blurring behind them. No shots followed, no pursuit. 3 days passed before they slowed enough to breathe. The ranch house stood weathered but whole when they reached it, the kitchen stove still warm from Thomas's morning fire. Eliza settled the children inside, broth heating, blankets fetched. They slept deep, tangled together on the narrow bed. Thomas watched from the doorway, hat in hands. "Grayson will come," he said. "I know," she said, not looking up from the stove. The iron handle burned her palm. She did not flinch. "You stay here." "No." She turned then, spoon in hand. "We face him together." He held her gaze, the silence thick with what neither would say yet, nodded once. "Together." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains gold, Eliza stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under her boots. The air cooled fast, carrying the scent of cooling earth and distant rain. Thomas joined her, leaning against the post, eyes on the road. "Tracks again," he said. "Fresh, his men." She nodded. "How many?" "4, armed." The stew inside bubbled, forgotten. The children slept on. "We prepare," she said. They did. Barricades at the doors, lanterns placed for light, rifles cleaned, powder dry. Eliza moved with purpose, her hands steady as she loaded shells, her mind tracing patterns from years of keeping ledgers, what came in, what went out, what was owed. By the fourth morning, a week into their flight-turned siege, Grayson's foreman rode up alone, white cloth tied to his saddle horn. "Parley," he called from the gate. Thomas stepped out, Eliza behind him, rifle loose but ready. The porch boards felt solid under her feet, the wind sharp with the promise of storm. "What do you want?" Thomas said. Foreman spat. "Grayson wants the woman. She has his papers, ledgers that do not match his books." Eliza stepped forward. "I have them. Every note, every dollar owed and paid." Foreman eyed her. "Hand them over. Kids, stay. You walk." Thomas shifted, a wall at her side. "She does not walk." Foreman laughed low. "Ranch is forfeit anyway, Hale. Drought took your herd. Grayson holds the deed." Eliza felt Thomas tense beside her. "Not yet," she said, voice even. "I have the receipts, signed, dated. Paid in full before my husband died." "Lies," Foreman said. "Grayson says different. Then let the town judge," she said. "Bring the elder, Mrs. Harrow." She saw the payments. Foreman paused, eyes narrowing. "You think that changes anything?" "It changes everything," she said. "Truth does." He wheeled his horse, dust rising, and rode off without answer. The air hung heavy after, thunder rumbling distant. Thomas looked at her. "You read him clear." She met his eyes. "I read men like him in ledgers every day." He almost nodded, almost smiled. "This is dusty vows where stories like hers live. Women who were underestimated, men who did not yet know what they were missing. If you want the next story the moment it arrives, subscribe now." Then, back to the ranch. A week into their arrangement, the town gathered at the church steps, Mrs. Harrow at the center, her hands gnarled but steady as she held the ledgers Eliza had brought. Grayson stood at the edge, face red under his hat, Foreman at his shoulder. "Read it," Mrs. Harrow said, voice carrying clear over the murmurs. Eliza did, page by page, dates and amounts plain. Paid in full, dollars tallied, witnesses named. Grayson shifted, forged. Mrs. Harrow fixed him with a look. "I signed half." "You know it." The crowd murmured louder, heads turning. The town gossip, Mrs. Ellis, who had whispered widow too old to keep house now, fell silent, eyes on Eliza different. Grayson snarled, "This ain't over." Thomas stepped forward then, voice low but carrying. "It is." "Leave my land." "Your land," Grayson spat, "till the bank says different." Eliza closed the ledger. "Bank has my records now." "Paid." Grayson wheeled, men following, dust cloud rising as they rode out. The crowd lingered, nods turning to words of thanks. Mrs. Harrow touched Eliza's arm. "Knew you had it in you, girl." Quiet strength. Eliza nodded, throat tight. "Thank you." Thomas watched it all from her side, silent, but his hand brushed hers once, brief, gone before she could turn. That evening, storm broke, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows. Inside, the kitchen glowed warm from the stove, children asleep, broth simmering. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric damp. "You turned them," Thomas said from the doorway. "Truth did," she said. He stepped closer, heat from the stove mirroring the one building slow between them. Eliza. The name landed different, heavier. She looked up. "Thank you," he said. "For keeping what is mine." She paused. "Keeping us." Rain pounded harder. He didn't move away. By the fourth morning after, Grayson's men came hard, 6 riders thundering up the road at dawn, rifles glinting. Thomas saw them first from the barn, shouting warning. Eliza roused the children to the root cellar, door barred, then grabbed her rifle, moving to the porch. "Stay inside," Thomas said, mounting fast. "No," she said, beside him on her horse. "We ride as one." He looked at her, rain slick on his face from the night before, something breaking open in his eyes. Together. They rode out, not to meet but to flank, using the dry creek for cover. Gunfire cracked, lead splintering wood at the house. The men dismounted, advancing. Eliza saw at first the foreman signaling left, 2 breaking off toward the barn. She wheeled, firing low, horse between her and return fire. One man dropped, clutching leg. The other turned. Thomas came from the right, rifle barking, downing the foreman clean. The rest faltered, horses rearing in confusion. Grayson himself rode up then, from the rear, face twisted. "You think this ends it, Hale?" Eliza spurred forward, rifle steady. "It ends with the papers. I sent them to the sheriff last night. Every note, every lie." Grayson paled. "Bluff." "Truth," she said, "like always." His men broke then, wheeling back, Grayson cursing as he followed. Dust and smoke hung thick, the air sharp with powder and wet earth. They rode back to the house, children emerging wide-eyed but whole. Thomas dismounted first, helping Sarah down, his hands gentle. Eliza watched, chest tight. Inside, as dusk fell, porch slick with rain, Thomas stood with her. "You saved us," he said. "We saved each other," she said. He took her hand then, plain, irreversible, thumb tracing her knuckles. "Eliza, stay." She squeezed back. "I will." He pulled her close, forehead to hers, breath mingling warm in the cooling air. No words after, just the choice. She walked into that nightmare with nothing but a mother's resolve and ledgers that would not bend. He walked out knowing he had found the one worth riding for. "Tell me, would you have circled left like she did, or charged straight? Leave your answer below. Tomorrow, a widow named Rose finds a burned homestead and a sheriff's badge left in the dust with her name scratched on the back. Subscribe now so you do not miss her story. Her children were taken while she slept. The cowboy said, 'We ride until we find them all.'" She woke to a silence that did not belong to a house with children. The bed was cold where small bodies should have been, and the door stood open to a dawn that smelled of dust and horse sweat. By the time she reached the yard, the tracks were already fading into the hard-packed road that led out of town. The man who found her there did not offer comfort. He looked at the ground, then at her, and said they would ride. This is not a story about rescue. It is a story about 2 people who had already lost enough and what it cost them to choose not to lose anything more. The latch hung loose against the wood, tapping in a thin rhythm against the doorframe as the morning wind pushed through. Eliza Carter stood barefoot on the kitchen planks, the cold rising through her bones, her hands still holding the edge of the table where she had fallen asleep, with her head bent over a ledger she no longer needed. The house smelled faintly of ash and last night's boiled coffee. There were no voices, no small footsteps, no breath that was not her own. She moved without thinking, crossing the room in 3 steps, pushing the door wide enough that it struck the outer wall with a dull crack. The yard stretched pale under a sky just beginning to lighten the dirt marked by the restless prints of horses. Not hers. She owned no horse, not anymore. The trough had been knocked crooked, weight against it in a hurry. Eliza. The name came from behind her, carried low and even. She turned, and the world narrowed to the man standing at the edge of her yard hat. In his hands, eyes not on her face, but on the ground between them. Thomas Hale did not cross thresholds without permission. He stood where the dust met the sparse grass, broad shoulders set as if he expected resistance even now. "My children," she said. The words came out without tremor, stripped to their bone. He nodded once. "I know. How?" I saw the wagon before dawn, he said. Did not belong to anyone in town. 2 men. One drove, one rode behind. I followed as far as the ridge. She stepped past him onto the hard road, her bare feet meeting the chill of it without hesitation. Then, we are not standing here. You will need boots, he said, and a coat. It will turn cold once the sun is up. She did not look back. I will ride barefoot if I have to. He watched her for a heartbeat, then turned toward his own place across the way, the ranch that had once been known for its herd and now for its stubborn refusal to die. You will not, he said. Give me 10 minutes.